welcome to Mind the People. I am your host, Alara, and I'm so incredibly glad you are here with me today. Go ahead and grab yourself a coffee or a tea or whatever gets you through the day and pull up a chair. We have got a massive one to get into today. Seriously, this is one of those topics that I reckon is going to have a lot of you nodding your head so hard you might need a neck brace by the end of the episode. We're talking about leadership, but not the shiny LinkedIn influencer version of leadership where everyone wakes up at 4 in the morning and drinks green juice and never makes a mistake. We are talking about the messy, uncomfortable, behind-the-scenes reality of trust and honesty in the workplace. I came across this absolute belter of an article recently. It was written by an HR practitioner who has spent over a decade working across Bangladesh and Australia. They have worked in commercial banks in Dhaka. They have managed huge recruitment pipelines for healthcare and hospitality in Sydney, and they are currently in the HR department at Shimanto Bank PLC. So this person has been in the room where it happens, the disciplinary hearings, the performance reviews, the spaces where people's careers actually hang in the balance, and they opened this piece of the question that stopped me dead in my tracks. They said over all these years, across hundreds of managers, they have always asked leaders one deceptively simple question. Do you consider yourself an honest leader? And every single time, without fail, the answer is yes. 100% of the time. Not one leader has ever sat across from this HR professional and said, you know what? Nah, I actually cut corners and lie to my team. Of course they don't. We all want to be the hero of our own story, right? But then the author asks the teams, who report to those exact same leaders, a slightly different question. They ask, does your leader consistently demonstrate honesty in their conduct? And the affirmative responses just fall off a cliff. They drop to barely half, 50%. Just sit with that for a second. We have a 50% gap, a massive yawning chasm between how leaders view their own integrity and how their staff actually experience it. The author calls this the silent crisis of modern organisations, and I completely agree. It is not a crisis of policy. I mean, fair dinkum, every corporate bank or mid-sized firm out there has a beautifully formatted ethics code sitting on their intranet somewhere, probably unread since the day it was uploaded. It is not a lack of value statements. It is a crisis of visible practice. It is destroying trust, and it is bleeding talent dry. The article dives right into what they are calling the Great Trust Recession. And look, the numbers back this up in a terrifying way. The Edelman Trust Barometer for 2024 shows trust in business leadership is sitting at just 62% globally. Financial services, unsurprisingly, is right down the bottom of the barrel. And then you look at the Gallup State of the Global Workplace Report for 2023. This is the one that always gets me. Only 23% of employees worldwide are actually engaged at work. 23%. And a staggering 59% are doing what we all now call quiet quitting. They are doing the bare minimum required to not get fired, and absolutely nothing more. Now, we talk about quiet quitting a lot on this show, usually as a symptom of burnout. But this article reframes it completely. These stats are not just numbers on a page. They represent billions of dollars in lost productivity, sure. But more importantly, they represent millions of people living out their careers in a state of quiet disillusionment. They are a whole generation of professionals who have learnt the hard way that what leaders say and what leaders do are two completely different things. Why is this happening? Well, the author makes a brilliant point here. It is not just the spectacular headline-grabbing fraud that does the damage. It is the mundane stuff, the small deceits, the convenient silences, the selective truths. When a leader engages in those little everyday evasions, it teaches the entire organisation that honesty is just an aspirational concept, not an operational one. It is something you do when it is easy and you drop the second it gets hard. The author describes this cascading nature of dishonesty, and honestly, reading this part felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Imagine a senior leader inflating a revenue projection just to keep the board happy for one more quarter. They probably tell themselves it is just a bit of optimism, but the message that sends down the chain is crystal clear. Hitting the numbers matters more than telling the truth. So the middle manager below them feels the squeeze, and they pressure a team leader to make their client pipeline look a bit rosier than it is. Then that team leader tells a relationship manager to frame this situation positively in a report. By the time that directive hits the front line, the culture is completely cooked. This isn't just theory. The article points to the massive Wells Fargo cross-selling scandal. Between 2002 and 2016, employees created around 3.5 million unauthorized accounts. 3.5 million! And the author rightly points out that this pressure didn't start with Dave the teller at the local branch. It cascaded down from a leadership team that prioritized aggressive sales targets over reality. It cost them over $3 billion in fines and wrecked their reputation. And the author saw the exact same structural dynamic playing out in the banking sector in Dhaka. They managed over 110 disciplinary cases, and they noted this grimly repeating pattern. A branch would start tweaking a KPI here, softening an audit finding there, and the rot would almost always trace straight back up to a manager who had communicated, through their own actions, that accuracy was negotiable. It is rarely just one rogue employee having a crack at the system. It is an environment where dishonesty is normalized from the top down. Before we get into how this physically alters the chemistry of a workplace, I actually want to read a message I got from a listener yesterday, because it is so incredibly relevant to this exact point. Oh, I got a message from Sarah in Brisbane. Sarah writes, "Hey Lara, love the show. I'm a regional manager in retail, and I'm currently flat out like a lizard drinking, trying to manage my store teams while dealing with a head office that drives me absolutely up the wall. Our CEO sends out these weekly emails about how our core value is radical transparency and putting our people first. But last month, we had a major safety issue with our warehouse racking. I flagged it, said we needed to shut down the back room for 2 days to fix it safely. My boss told me we couldn't afford the downtime and to just work around it quietly until the end of the month. Ugh. I felt sick having to tell my team to keep working back there. Half of my best staff have handed in their notice since then, and the head office is blaming me for the turnover. How do you even fight that?" Wow. Sarah, mate, thank you for sending that in, and I'm so sorry you are dealing with that absolute mess. But do you see how perfectly that illustrates what this is talking about? The CEO claims the value is radical transparency. That is the claimed value, the stuff that looks great on the website. But the demonstrated value, the actual visible practice of the company under pressure, is shut up, risk your safety, and hit the targets. Sarah's team didn't quit because of the pay. They quit because the demonstrated values of the organization told them they were expendable, despite whatever fluffy emails the CEO was sending out. Sarah, hang in there. And honestly, if I were you, I would be polishing up my CV too, because a culture like that rarely changes unless the very top leadership gets cleaned out. And that brings us right back to the article, because the author tackles this exact distinction. They say there is this dangerous misconception out there that integrity is a private virtue, that it is something quietly residing in a leader's heart, and it doesn't need to be shown. The author calls this comforting nonsense, and I love that phrasing. Comforting nonsense. In a workplace, if integrity isn't visible, it doesn't exist. The author brings up the LIBOR manipulation scandal from 2012, where traders were rigging the benchmark interest rate for basically the entire global financial system. Barclays, UBS, Deutsche Bank, all of them had massive, shiny ethics frameworks and compliance manuals. What they didn't have was a culture where honesty was visibly practiced under pressure. Winning was the visible value. The author also mentions the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia, where $4.5 billion was misappropriated. Goldman Sachs paid over $5 billion in penalties for their role in it, and the author asks the million-dollar question: why did no one stop it? Because when leaders visibly prioritize closing the deal over doing the due diligence, everyone underneath them learns very quickly that asking hard questions is a great way to end your career. So what does visible integrity actually look like? The author gives some fantastic, concrete examples. It is a leader sitting in a quarterly review and saying, "I was wrong about that forecast, and here is what I have learned from the error." It is a manager presenting the bad news to the board without burying it on page 47 in the footnotes. It is a department head refusing to approve a dodgy transaction and clearly explaining why, even when signing off on it, would mean a massive bonus. In the HR space, the author talks about their own experience managing those disciplinary proceedings. They maintained a 98% policy application consistency rate, with 0 successful legal challenges. That doesn't happen because you have a clever lawyer. That happens because you are visibly committed to procedural fairness. You give everyone a proper showcase notice, a real chance to respond, and you base the decision on evidence, not on whether the person plays golf with the CEO. When HR does that, it sends a massive signal to the whole company that the rules actually matter. And then there is the story of Paul O'Neill. If you haven't heard this one, buckle up, because it is legendary. O'Neill took over as the CEO of Alcoa, the massive aluminium company, back in 1987. On his very first day, he stands up in front of all these Wall Street analysts and investors, and he tells them that his primary metric for the company from now on is not going to be profit. It is not going to be earnings. It is going to be workplace safety. The room was absolutely stunned. People literally ran out and sold their shares because they thought the bloke had lost the plot. But O'Neill didn't flinch. He picked one honest metric that could not be fudged or manipulated, and he stuck to it with absolute unwavering commitment. And you know what happened? By the time he left, Alcoa's worker injury rate had dropped to 1/20th of the national average, and as a lovely little bonus, the company's market value had increased fivefold. Visible integrity didn't cost Alcoa a thing. It built them into a powerhouse. Right, let's park that for a second, take a quick breather, because the next bit gets into the actual psychology of how dishonesty poisons a team, and I want to make sure we're sharp for it. Today's episode is brought to you by Brewtide Coffee. Look, you all know I am dead set serious about my morning coffee. If it isn't good, the rest of my day is basically a write-off. Brewtide ethically sources their beans, roasts them locally, and delivers them straight to your door so fresh you can practically hear them crackling. Whether you are pulling a shot from an espresso machine or just making a quick French press before you run out the door, Brewtide delivers a consistently brilliant cup every single time. And they are actually walking the talk on sustainability too, which, given what we are talking about today, is something I really appreciate. Head over to brewtidecoffee.com and use the code ALARA for 20% off your first order. All right, we are back. So we have established that leadership dishonesty cascades and that visible integrity is the only kind that matters. But the author goes a step further here and talks about the organisational chemistry of honesty. They say that a leader's relationship with the truth physically alters the culture of a team, like a chemical reaction in a lab. When a leader tells the truth, especially when it is awkward or embarrassing, they create psychological safety. That is a term coined by Professor Amy Edmondson at Harvard. It basically means the team feels safe to take interpersonal risks. If you are in a psychologically safe environment, you can put your hand up and say, "Hey, I think we are about to make a massive mistake," and you know you won't get your head bitten off. The author references Google's Project Aristotle, which was this massive multi-year study into what makes a great team, and the number one factor above everything else was psychological safety. But what happens when you reverse that? What happens when a leader tells little lies? Cynicism creeps in. The author says it enters the culture like a slow poison, and I reckon that is the perfect description. Employees start translating leadership speak. I loved this part of the article. The author says, when a dishonest leader says, "We value your input," the team translates that to, "We will proceed regardless." When they say, "This is a collaborative decision," the team hears, "This has already been decided." When they say, "There will be no redundancies," everyone instantly goes and updates their CV. We have all been there, right? I know I have. You sit in a town hall meeting, listening to some executives spin a narrative that everyone in the room knows is complete rubbish, and you can just feel the energy getting sucked out of the room. And this cynicism is not harmless. The article cites a study from the Journal of Applied Psychology that blew my mind. It found that employees who think their leaders are dishonest are 3.5 times more likely to withhold information that could stop the company from making a huge mistake. They are nearly 3 times more likely to stop doing any discretionary work, that extra effort that makes a good team great, and they are over 4 times more likely to actively start looking for another job within a year. The author has seen this happen in real time. They talk about watching entire teams just lose their spark, not because the pay was rubbish, but because the manager made promises they didn't keep, or stole credit for someone else's work, or weaponized the performance management system to punish people who gave honest feedback. It starts with skepticism, it moves to quiet quitting, and it ends with the best people walking out the door. And replacing those people costs a fortune. between 50 and 200% of their annual salary, according to the Society for Human Resource Management. If you are in banking or tech or healthcare, where you need highly specialized talent, that cost is just astronomical. On the flip side, companies with high employee trust outperform the market by a factor of 3 over a 15-year period. It is not about having the flashiest tech or the biggest marketing budget. It is about having leaders who actually walk the talk. By the way, all of this chat about quiet quitting and toxic culture ties perfectly into what we are going to be diving into next week. We're doing a whole episode on the concept of toxic resilience, how companies force employees to just bounce back from systemic failures instead of actually fixing the systems. I am so keen for that one, so make sure you hit follow so you don't miss it, and I will be dropping a link to today's full HR article in the show notes as well, because you really need to read the whole thing for yourself. Okay, let's talk about the mirror effect. This is where the author brings in Albert Bandura's social learning theory from the 70s. Basically, humans are monkeys. We are imitative creatures. We do not learn how to behave by reading a PDF from the compliance team. We learn by watching our boss. The author shares their experience managing a massive workforce in Sydney, over 1,100 staff and building management and recruiting 150 people a month for hospitality. And they noticed something glaringly obvious. The teams with the lowest turnover and the happiest staff were always led by managers whose private actions matched their public words. The correlation was overwhelming. And then jumping over to Bangladesh, managing those banking disciplinary cases, they saw the exact same thing. The branches with the fewest compliance breaches were run by managers who held themselves to the exact same standards they demanded of their junior tellers. It is monkey see, monkey do. The author uses the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis as an example. You had all these young mortgage brokers approving loans for people who clearly couldn't pay them back. Why? Because their managers were actively encouraging it. They used slick words like innovative products and expanding access, but the behavior they were modeling was clear. Write the bad line, get the bonus, don't ask questions. The junior staff just mirrored what the leadership showed them was acceptable. But it works in reverse too. Look at Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase after the London whale trading disaster in 2012. He didn't just send out an all-staff email with some new rules. He physically changed his own behavior. He started showing up to the risk committee meetings himself. It demanded people tell him about losses instantly, was no corporate spin. He stood up in public and took the blame as a leadership failure. And because the CEO visibly changed how he handled the truth, the whole massive organization shifted with him. Now this is the bit that really got me thinking. The crucible of pressure. The author points out that most leaders don't lie when things are going well. It is easy to be honest when the profits are up and the sun is shining. The dishonesty happens during a crisis, during a bad quarter, during an audit. That is when your character actually gets stress tested. Look at Wirecard, that massive German payments company that just spectacularly imploded in 2020 because almost 2 billion euros simply didn't exist. The forensic investigators found that it didn't start as a massive criminal conspiracy. It started as tiny exaggerations, rounding a number up to keep the market happy, hyping up a partnership a bit too much, ignoring a weird transaction because looking into it would be a headache. Just small, cowardly evasions made under the pressure of market expectations. But each lie made the next one necessary until the whole company was just a house of cards. The author says, the moment you bend the truth under pressure is the moment you begin building a house on sand. The author saw this in their own disciplinary cases, irregularities in credit proposals that started as one tiny misrepresentation, left uncorrected, that snowballed until people's careers were ruined. It wasn't mastermind fraud. It was a panicked middle manager calculating that a small lie today was easier than having a tough conversation tomorrow. Compare that to Anna Botten, the executive chairman of Banco Santander. During the European debt crisis, she chose to be brutally honest with regulators and investors about how much distressed debt the bank was holding. It was a massive short-term hit. The share price tanked. Analysts were furious. But long-term, Santander survived with its credibility intact because people saw a leader who told the truth when lying would have been so much easier. That is real leadership. The financial cost of all this is staggering. The article points out that the typical organization loses 5% of its revenue to fraud every year. And when executives commit the fraud, The median loss is 4 times higher than when lower level employees do it. Between 2008 and 2024, the big banks paid out over $350 billion in fines for conduct failures. $350 billion. That is money straight out of the pockets of shareholders, customers, and staff. And a study from MIT found that a toxic corporate culture is 10.4 times more predictive of someone quitting than their salary is. People will work for average pay if they respect their boss. They will not stick around for great pay if their boss is a snake. So, how do we actually fix this? The author lays out 5 incredibly practical steps for building what they call a culture of radical honesty, and I want to walk through these because they're brilliant. First up, the uncomfortable truth habit. The author says every leader should make a point of sharing at least one inconvenient truth in every major meeting. Now, I will be honest, my first reaction to this was, okay, but is that actually realistic? Walking into a board meeting and just volunteering that you stuffed something up? That sounds terrifying. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that is exactly why it works. It is not about being a downer. It is about proving week after week that you do not hide from reality. If you can talk about your failures with the same clarity that you talk about your wins, your team learns that truth is actually the baseline, not a nice to have. Second is transparent decision making. The author argues that the worst kind of lying isn't making up facts. It is hiding the real reasons behind your decisions. If you have to make a brutal call like cutting a budget or shifting strategy, and you actually explain the real trade-offs and the uncertainties to your team, they will respect you. They might hate the decision, but they will respect you. What destroys trust is when people suspect you are feeding them a PR spin and hiding the real motive. Third is error acknowledgement. There is research showing that leaders who admit their mistakes are actually rated as more competent by their teams, not less. We all have this deep panicked instinct to cover up our stuff-ups. But when a boss stands up and says, "Yep, I made the wrong call there. Here is how we fix it," they are giving everyone else permission to learn from failure instead of just pretending to be perfect all the time. Fourth is structural safeguarding. This is where HR really earns its keep. It is not enough for one manager to be a good person. The system has to reward honesty. You need anonymous reporting lines that actually work. You need to promote people based on how they got their results, not just the results themselves. The author talks about their time at AB Bank, getting a 99% compliance rate. The secret wasn't the policy itself. It was the fact that the policy was enforced equally. If the big boss's mate gets caught breaking the rules and it gets swept under the rug, your entire compliance framework is officially a joke. The rules have to apply to everyone, or they apply to no one. And finally, consistent follow-through. If you stand up at a town hall and say you have zero tolerance for dishonesty, and then next week your top salesperson gets caught lying to a client and you do nothing because they bring in too much money, you are done. Your credibility is permanently cooked. You aren't just tolerating a lie, you are actively adding your own hypocrisy to the mix. The author says the defining moment of your leadership is how you respond to the very first integrity violation you see. Everyone is watching what you do in that exact moment. Shh. The article finishes with a direct challenge, and I want to read the spirit of this straight to you, especially if you have just stepped up into a management role. Maybe you just got a promotion. You have a slightly bigger desk, a title that feels a bit heavy, and a team looking to you for direction. The author writes this from the trenches. From the HR rooms in Dhaka and Sydney, where the show cause notices are drafted and people's livelihoods are actually on the line, they say, here is the reality of your new job. Your team is watching you constantly. They are watching how you treat the junior staff. They are listening to how you talk about people when they leave the room. They are watching to see if your private actions match your public speeches. You are going to face immense pressure to lie. You will be pressured to massage the numbers, to take credit for a brilliant idea one of your juniors had, to use a clever little ambiguity to get yourself out of a tight spot. But every time you do that, you're making a massive withdrawal from a trust account that took you years to build, and you can empty it in a single afternoon. Talent and strategy are great, but integrity is the only variable that actually keeps a team together when the wheels fall off. So the author lays down 3 non-negotiable rules for you. 1. Never knowingly misrepresent a fact to anyone. 2. Admit your mistakes immediately without getting defensive. And 3, never ever punish someone for telling you the truth, even if that truth is a massive headache for you. Doing this is going to make your job harder. You will lose arguments. You might get beaten out for a bonus by someone who is willing to play dirty. You are going to have some deeply uncomfortable conversations. But you know what? You will sleep at night. Your team will walk through fire for you. And when the crisis hits, and it always hits, you will have the one currency that actually matters: the unshakable trust of the people standing beside you. Integrity isn't something you just have. It is something you do. It is a daily, relentless practice, and the choice of whether to practice it is entirely up to you. Wow, what a piece of writing. I am going to be chewing on that for a long time, and I hope you do tune on that for a long time, and I hope you do too. Have a think this week about the gap between what your organization claims to value and what it actually rewards. And more importantly, have a look in the mirror and ask yourself what values you are demonstrating when the pressure gets turned up. That is all we have got time for today on Mind the People. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. If this episode sparked something for you, or if it made you think of a particular boss, good or bad, please share it with a friend or drop a review on whatever app you are listening on right now. It really helps the show grow, and I love reading your thoughts. And don't forget to email or DM me your own stories. I might just read them out next week. Until then, keep having those hard conversations, look after yourselves, and I will catch you next time. Cheers.